What's your assessment of the Kit Kellogg's plan on freezing the front lines and also deploying European peacekeeping forces without American U.S. boots on the ground in Ukraine?
Well, of course, General Kellogg's, a couple of things he said give me hope. Number one, he said publicly, Russia cannot be trusted. That's a very important starting point for any negotiation with Russia, is to acknowledge that they cannot be trusted. The second thing is he has emphasized the importance of Ukrainian sovereignty. That's important. But I think that if you start talking about any negotiation that allows Russia to keep what it has, especially Crimea, I think is a bad deal. As long as Russia controls Crimea, they will be able to block access into Azov Sea. They will be able to threaten the Odessa, Kherson, and Mykolaiv ports, and they will always be ready to launch the next attack that will surely be coming in the next 2 or 3 or 4 years. So I have a problem with us putting pressure on Ukraine to give up territory for the sake of peace, when at the same time, you acknowledge that Russia cannot be trusted. On the subject of a peacekeeping force, a good example of how to do it is the NATO IFOR, the implementation force that went into Bosnia in 1995. First of all, they had a real mandate. Second of all, they had a real agreement, the Dayton Peace Accord, to be implemented. And then NATO went in with a significant force that had air, land, and sea capabilities. They had all the things that were needed to be a credible deterrent force. It had a very clear chain of command, and it had rules of engagement that would allow soldiers to defend themselves, to use their weapons where appropriate. So any peacekeeping force has to have all these things. I mean, it has to have counter-drone capability, has to have air and missile defense capability, and it has to be trained and ready to defend itself. Otherwise, it will not be a deterrent, because for sure the Russians on day one will begin to test it, just like they did after the ceasefires of the Minsk agreement, which were obviously a total failure.
Do you believe that Russia cannot sustain this war for a long haul if Trump's administration continue to put pressure on Russia, if sanctions are not lifted, and if Ukrainian troops continue to move deep inside the Russian territory, also if Trump provides Ukraine with security guarantees and also with security assistance?
I don't know. I would be very skeptical that Russia could keep doing what they're doing today through to the end of 2025. They will find the bodies somewhere, but you can't produce tanks and artillery and replace equipment at the rate that you're losing it, or they can't. And if the U.S. were to and our European allies, by the way, Europe, the good news I'm hearing from European countries is that more and more understand the importance of helping Ukraine. And so I would anticipate that we may start seeing an increase in what some European countries are providing, if there's a sense of urgency. But I think many of them also are kind of waiting to see what is the U.S. going to do. So, I mean, only President Zelensky and Ukrainian government can decide whether or not is it better to keep going or is it better to move towards some kind of negotiated settlement. But if I'm an advisor to the president of Ukraine and I see what I see now, I'm thinking, why would you stop? Are things going to get better? Is security for Ukraine going to get better? Is the future for Ukraine going to improve if you accept a negotiated outcome with Russia in the next few months, unless there are significant security guarantees, real security guarantees of some sort, and a promise of real investment in Ukraine's reconstruction. And I don't think a lot of money is going to come to Ukraine if the big money, I'm talking about big money investors, believe that the war will start again in 2, 3, or 4 years.
Also, The Economist and the New York Times have predicted the end of the war in Ukraine this year. What is your prediction on that?
Well, first of all, I am disgusted with how much professional journalists, as well as some of the well-known analysts like Sharap and Kaufman and some others, continue to have this doom sort of analysis that there's no way Ukraine could win, that, we've got to fix this. Instead, I think that Ukraine, again, President Zelensky is the one that can should decide whether or not Ukraine continues to fight. The war could end, of course, the war could end tomorrow if Vladimir Putin says, I can't take it anymore. There's no way I can win. We've lost too much. Our economy is terrible. My people are sick of this, and we're leaving. He's not going to do that, of course. But the war could end the day that Putin says, okay, it's over. He can change the narrative and start pulling out. Now, again, that's not going to happen. I think the more likely thing is that at some point, this war, honestly, it feels like the momentum has already changed from a sense of Russia's eventually going to win to, I don't think Russia can win. I think Ukraine can win. And but that's the way it is in wartime. War is a test of will, and it's a test of logistics. And both sides are pushing until the other side says, we're done.
From your perspective, how should the West react to Russia's hybrid warfare inside Europe?
Well, first of all, I don't use the phrase hybrid warfare because hybrid makes it sound like something that's not that bad, that it's below the level of war, and therefore you don't have to really do something about it, except, complain or shake your fist or whatever. I think the Russians are always at war, and they use things along a continuum from disinformation, criminal activity, sabotage, destruction of undersea cables, threatening nuclear war, kinetic force, and then nuclear war. So every day they're doing something along that spectrum. And so the West, we need to realize that the Russians are at war with us. Even if we don't think we're at war with them, they are definitely at war with us. That doesn't mean we have to respond with missiles and aircraft and rocket launchers against them. Far from it. But every time they do something that they violate airspace, they violate or they just conduct sabotage, there needs to be a price. They need to pay a price. They need to recognize that we're not going to tolerate that. That means that we have to have the right laws and policies in place so that we can quickly react, so that we can stop their ships that are illegally exporting oil and gas through the Baltic Sea. Finland has given us a good example. They went out and seized this vessel, the Eagle S, and brought it into port. And this is the kind of thing that we should be doing. There's a lot of ways that we can respond that don't have to be exactly the same. I mean, find other ways asymmetrically to respond to what Russia has done. But every time they do something, they have to feel pain. Look, they have the economy the size of Spain. There's no way they should be able to continue to fight if we got serious about helping Ukraine. We got a lot of tools that we have not even actually tried yet. That's the part that's frustrating. We haven't even tried. So you asked me, what should the West be doing? We should realize that the Russians are at war, and we need to act accordingly.
And how can you assess current Russia's position in the Middle East with the fall of Bashar al-Assad regime? What is your take on that?
Well, this is a huge opportunity for the West, for Turkey, for Ukraine, for Israel, obviously. Not only has Russia been exposed as a terrible ally, just like they were not able to help Armenia, they were not able to help save Assad, and they've now lost, it appears that they're losing their Navy base and their air base in Syria. So their ability to influence things, not only in the Middle East, but in the Mediterranean, is potentially going to be significantly reduced. And as I mentioned earlier, the departure of this submarine, the Novorossiysk, because they don't have the ability anymore to take care of these submarines in the Mediterranean. This is a significant impact on Russia's ability to project power. Now, maybe they'll eventually have something in Libya, but you can't just create a new Navy base. I mean, the maintenance, all the things necessary to have a functioning Navy base that's worth something, it will take them a long time to recreate what they had in Syria. For Israel, obviously, the fall of Syria means that Iran's ability to continue to ship weapons to Hezbollah via Syria, that's probably over or dramatically reduced. And the Israeli Air Force now has almost a clear, uninterrupted approach to Iran should Israel need to launch strikes against Iran. So a real opportunity here. And I think Turkey is probably the big winner in the region. They can expand their influence into northern Syria. I just hope that the United States and Turkey, our two NATO allies, are we think strategically and clever, and that we're clever about how to work with each other, recognizing that Turkey has legitimate interests in this area, and that how we figure out the Kurdish situation will be very important. And then finally, I thought Ukraine was very smart to immediately reach out to Syria and to use the opportunity to become the provider of grain that Russia used to be.
And my final question for you would be about Israel-Hamas negotiations. Do you expect any kind of success in this hostage exchange, hostage release negotiations between Israel and Hamas, and the possibility for a ceasefire there?
Yeah, this is a great question. I can't tell if this is really a priority for the Netanyahu government. I think there are 100, 102 hostages still out there somewhere. Some estimate that maybe a quarter to a third of them are actually already dead, but their bodies have not been returned. We don't know. It's a terrible situation for those families. But it doesn't seem that this is the priority for the Netanyahu government. I can't tell yet exactly what the Netanyahu government intends to do in Gaza. You still have fighting going on. Certainly, Israel has the upper hand here. But I don't know what all they intend to continue doing. I do believe when you ask, why is this war still going on? I mean, hasn't Israel pretty much destroyed most of Hamas' ability to launch attacks? And I think that the Netanyahu government, for now, benefits in a cynical sort of way by Israel remaining at war. Because the tradition in Israel is that whether or not people support the actual government, as long as Israel is at war, people will generally continue to support the government, understandably. So I think that what happens after the war ends, what happens to Netanyahu, is a big factor here.
Thank you, General Hodges, for your time and for your support for Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine.
Heroam Slava.
Thank you very much. Is he risking his life every time when he leaves Russia?
I believe so. Yeah, I believe so.
And you're confident that he will not be happy about risking his life for a deal with Donald Trump?
Well, so the only the only thing that can happen if President Putin meets with President Trump is that President Putin doesn't get what he wants. So why even meet with the guy, right? Because you're only going to make President Trump look good. You're not going to look good. You're going to look weak. And I've said it before that President Putin literally cannot stop this war because the Russian economy is it's off the rails right now, and it is overheating. And so if he stopped the war tomorrow and recalled soldiers, let's say they froze Ukrainian lines completely, they froze the lines in Ukraine, you would leave some soldiers in place, but a lot of soldiers would be demobilized. Well, now you have soldiers going home, they know how to use a gun, they don't have a job, they can't get a job, and suddenly all these people in weapons factories, they're out of a job as well. What is that a recipe for? Now, I know gun laws in Russia aren't the same as the United States, but I'll tell you this, if you're a former soldier and you know how to use a weapon, and maybe you did some shady stuff when you were a soldier, you can find weapons. It's not that hard. And now you have this perfect storm of men who have fought, they know how to kill, and they know how to use weapons. That's how you end up hung upside down outside of a gas station like Mussolini. Or you get the Ceausescu special. So President Putin literally can't stop this war because if he does, there is a significant risk that he might be removed from power.
But do you believe that Trump is capable of persuading Vladimir Putin or forcing him to stop this war with aiding Ukraine, with sending military equipment to Ukraine, allowing to strike inside Russia, and another portion of sanctions against Russian economy? Because on the other hand, there are lots of discussions that Russia cannot sustain such a high regime of sanctions for a long haul, for a long time, because Russia's economy has started to struggle, has started struggling because the interest rates are more than 20%. The GDP growth is slowed down by Western sanctions. There is a high rate of inflation in Russia. So do you believe that Trump can persuade Vladimir Putin to stop this war, even if he faces a physical threat to his life, even if Vladimir Putin will face a physical threat to his life?
I don't think so. And I say that because there's too many disadvantages to stopping the war. What I can see is President Trump convincing President Putin to continue the war, and that's when he starts losing ground. And I'm glad you mentioned the economy and sanctions, because one of the big problems with Russia right now is rail cars. A lot of their rail cars are made in the West. And a lot of this comes back to machine tools. Machine tools are the computer numeric control manufacturing systems that build parts. And you have a finite number of these machine tools. Russia doesn't really have a machine tool industry. China doesn't really have one either. So they get a lot of these machine tools from Europe. Now it's been about 3 years, and they've been using these machine tools essentially nonstop for 3 years to make parts. Well, now you have a choice. You can use these machine tools to make parts for the oil rigs that are driving your economy. You can use these machine tools to make weapons, or you can use these machine tools to make the bogies, which are the wheels that are underneath the rail cars, because those things are breaking down. So if you don't make parts for the oil rigs, you can't pay your army. You can't sell the oil to China and India and pay your army. If you don't make the weapon systems, your army has nothing to fight with. And if you don't make the bogies for underneath the rail cars, then you have no way of transporting your weapons. And that's an issue, right? So I could easily see a point where the sanctions work in the sense that Russia, they'll never be out of ways to make weapons, make oil rig parts, or make parts for rail cars, but there'll be less of them. And that will slowly build up to the point where we see Russia attacking with 1 or 2 tanks instead of 10, right? Because there's just fewer ways to logistically supply them. And I think that's when you're going to see the tide turn for Ukraine. And it will be a slow advance on Ukraine's side as different parts of Russian lines collapse. So can President Trump convince Putin to stop the war? No, but I believe that he can get the right weapons to Ukraine so that maybe not this year, but by next year, Russia is on the back foot to the point where they can't push weapons out to the front fast enough, and you start to see Ukraine gain ground. So this might be a stop the war in 2026, 2027 kind of thing, where Russia has to stop the war in 2 years because there's essentially no way of feeding all their troops, getting all their troops equipment. And by that point, you're going to run that risk of getting thrown out of office. But if you don't stop the war, the soldiers will rebel because they have no equipment to fight with.
So you're confident that Vladimir Putin can agree with Trump's proposal on a ceasefire only if he loses the ground in Ukraine?
I think it would be a last resort thing. It would probably be something that would happen in 2027. They're essentially going to run out of vehicles in, I guess, the next year or so. Now, they'll never really run out because they can still manufacture vehicles at about a rate of 50 a month, tanks and BMPs and so on. But their supply of cheap tanks from the Cold War is essentially gone. I think they have 2,000 or so vehicles left. And I don't know how many vehicles I don't know how long they can make that last. But if Covert Cabal, which is it's an organization on YouTube that literally counts tanks, if Covert Cabal is right, they have about 2,000 some vehicles left, and that'll probably last the next year.
So it seems like Vladimir Putin faces critical dilemma, because if he stops the war against Ukraine, according to your opinion, he will be deposed, dethroned, and he will be decapitated. His government, he will be deposed, and he could face a physical threat to his life. He could be eliminated. On the other hand, if he does not stop the war against Ukraine, economical issues will even be stronger for Russia, and the critical problems which are faced by Russia now will be even bigger, and Russia will not be able to sustain such critical issues.
You're absolutely correct. And one thing I have to give you credit for is that you use the word dilemma correctly. A dilemma is where you have to choose between two equally bad outcomes. And the one difference is that if President Putin continues the war, there may be some sort of saving grace. Something might happen that will prevent eventually Russia is going to collapse. It could collapse soon, or it could collapse later.
So you believe that Russia
right now,
definitely will collapse sometime in the future?
Yes. Yeah, I have almost no doubt that Russia will collapse at some point. If they stop the war, they'll collapse almost immediately. If they continue the war, I think there's actually less of a chance of collapse, because something might come up to the point where they're able to either make a breakthrough or something goes in their favor. It could be something as simple as Western Europe decides they've had enough of this. They want cheap Russian gas again. We're not going to support Ukraine anymore or send them shells. There is a non-zero chance that could happen. There is a non-zero chance that Russia could do an information war push to convince people that we're going to use nuclear weapons on the West if this doesn't stop. That might actually work. And then all of a sudden they are able to take ground because people stop supplying Ukraine with weapons. So if you want to get technical, it is better to, at least for Russia, it is better to continue the war in the hopes that other avenues might pay off for completing the annexation of Ukraine, although that could take years.
Also, from your perspective, it seems like Vladimir Putin also faces a dilemma about his physical threat, because if he continues the war against Ukraine, he could also face some critical issues, critical threats to his life, because he continues the war against Ukraine. And recently, Ukraine has eliminated Russian general Igor Kirillov inside the Kremlin, inside Moscow, in Moscow. On the other hand, if he stops the war against Ukraine, he also could be eliminated, deposed from his
You're absolutely correct.
from Kremlin. Does it mean that in any kind of case, Vladimir Putin has a good chance to be physically eliminated in any kind of scenario in the future?
I think that chance grows every day because look, you have generals who every general might think they can do a better job. And all you need is that one general who goes, you know what, I should be in charge. And I have the will of my troops behind me. My troops are loyal to me, not the Kremlin. Maybe I can do this. Now, I don't know whether that means the war would actually stop. The war might certainly continue because maybe there's some general thinks, hey, I know what I'm doing. I'm gonna prosecute this war the right way. Look, President Putin's what, 70 some years old? 72, is it? I think so, 72. I mean, look, when you're 72, you got more years in back of you than you do in front of you, right? So he's going to be taken out, one way or the other, either by God or by man. That day is coming. And what he doesn't want is to be taken out before that legacy of his is cemented.
Does it mean that Vladimir Putin has signed a death warrant for himself, after the day after he launched this illegal invasion of Ukraine?
I think that's an accurate assessment. There, he might have thought that, look, this is going to be a 3-day operation in and out. It's just going to be like Crimea. But that might have started the long road to hell, once he decided to commence the operation.
Also, I'd like to cover with you another interesting topic about recent Trump's statement on Panama Canal and Greenland. Trump said that it would serve U.S. national interest to regain control over Panama Canal and gain control over Greenland. And my first question will be about the Panama Canal deal. Do you feel that this Panama Canal deal is really a bad one? That's why Trump wants to reconsider the main points of this treaty with the government of Panama?
Well, of course it was a bad deal, right? Like it's something that the United States built. It's something that benefits Panama, and there is a strategic importance to the Panama Canal, an extreme strategic importance to it. Now, it would make sense for the United States to gain control over that, preferably by economic means or by negotiation. I think President Carter, who gave the Panama Canal essentially back to Panama, I think that he had good intentions, but at the time we weren't concerned about China as a world power. And essentially, if the United States controls the Panama Canal, it makes it a lot harder for Chinese ships to move into the Atlantic. Makes it extremely difficult for them to do so. So the Panama Canal is of extreme strategic importance.
And what are the chances of another military operation, invasion of Panama Canal by the U.S. military?
That would be difficult to do, not from a technical standpoint, but in order to do something like that, Congress would have to get on board. And it's very difficult to get congressmen to agree on anything, much less invading another country. It was difficult for them to get on board with invading Iraq. In some cases, it was difficult to get them. Well, Afghanistan was a little bit easier. Iraq was a little bit harder. And the only way we would be able to do something like that is with permission from Congress, because Congress holds the funding. The president can't really send troops anywhere for longer than a certain amount of time before Congress has to allocate money for those troops to stay where they are. Now, Panama doesn't have a military, so from a technical standpoint, it would be a very easy fight to actually get troops down to Panama, invade Panama, and take over the Panama Canal. It wouldn't be that difficult to do. But getting the funding to do that, whether it is the morally correct decision, that's a different story. And in all honesty, why fight when you can buy? And if there's enough people who are interested in selling and the United States has money, I don't see why the United States can't buy the Panama Canal back from Panama or come to some sort of licensing or leasing agreement for a certain amount of years. Oftentimes when you hold out a dollar bill, that's a lot more attractive than holding out a rifle.
And why does Donald Trump want Greenland from your perspective? Because there are U.S. troops in Greenland. They are deployed, and there is one military base in Greenland. So why does Trump want Greenland if U.S. military is already there?
So Greenland is probably one of the most important places in the world, or will be one of the most important places in the next century. Whether you believe in climate change or not, the ocean, the ice caps in the North Pole, they're receding. And what's going to happen is there's now going to be a northern passage to Europe. So Chinese ships that want to go to Europe, they would be able to go past the Bering Strait. They would be able to go through what was ice in the Bering Sea and the Arctic, and travel to Europe the long way, without going through the Panama Canal. So there's that. There's the fact that anybody who controls Greenland essentially will control the water route that will be popping up in the next couple of years in the Arctic. The second thing is that Greenland is in the perfect place to put a missile defense system. So if you can put a missile defense system in Greenland, you are essentially protecting everybody from Russian nuclear strikes. With we already have a radar system in Greenland, but by putting missiles there, it's a great way of creating a shield, an umbrella to shoot down missiles in the boost phase before they get to America. So Greenland is of extreme strategic importance. And I think that's why you kind of hear all this stuff about Greenland. Yes, we do have a military base, but I believe the president thinks that it's very important to maintain control over the entire country, or at least some sort of hegemony over the entire country, mainly because it is of the utmost strategic importance for America.
Does this mean that Trump's plans, Trump's willingness to take control over Greenland and also Panama Canal, don't you think that these plans are really bad news for Russian dictator Vladimir Putin, especially taking control over Greenland?
Taking control over Greenland would not be good. Russia wants the Arctic to be their lake. China is trying to get a foothold in the Arctic as well, because they see its importance for delivering goods. Getting a permanent American presence, or even buying Greenland and turning it into an American territory, that would be kind of a game changer for Russia, because there's this massive land barrier there that they would have to fly over. Their missiles would have to fly over before they hit the United States. So it really prevents their deterrence, their missile deterrence. And actually, now that I think of it, it doesn't just prevent ICBMs, land-based missiles. It also prevents submarines from getting close to the United States. And that's because a lot of Russian submarines are in what are called bastions in the Kara Sea. And these bastions, essentially very few Russian submarines ever leave the Kara Sea. Instead, their nuclear missile submarines just kind of sit in the Kara Sea for, I think, 30 days at a time. as their second strike capability. But if you're in the Kara Sea, what do you have to and you shoot your missiles toward America? What do you have to fly over to get to the U.S.? You got to fly over Greenland, right? So that would actually negate their missile submarines as well. So you get 2 for 1 purchasing Greenland.
And my last and quick question for you, and if you can deliver a quick answer, it would be great. Would you personally support Donald Trump and the United States gaining control over Greenland and also, for example, a Panama Canal?
It's a very good question. From a strategic standpoint, it probably wouldn't be a bad idea to purchase these things. Invasion, that's going a little too far. You're essentially going to invade another member of NATO. That doesn't make any sense. And people talk about invasion, but people talk about things they don't understand all the time. Purchasing probably wouldn't be a bad idea. There is precedent for this. We purchased Alaska from Russia. I want to say it was in 1826, I believe. I might be getting that wrong. But there is a history of the United States purchasing land. And if the people of Greenland agree to it, why not?
Thank you, Ryan, for your time and for your support for Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to come on your show.